Hi, welcome to Storytime in the Pollinator Garden. I'm Pam from Lincoln City Libraries, and this is Courtney from the UNLV Lab. And a previous episode, we made wild bee hotels, and we looked at some other places where they live.
Yeah, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about native or wild bees. So Pam, when I say bees, what comes to mind? Besides maybe like the slight fear of getting stung.
Right. Usually I think of honeybees just because I eat a lot of honey.
Yeah, right. And that's totally normal. Before I started working with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with the Bee Lab, I only really knew about honeybees, like maybe bumblebees as well. But that's pretty common for honeybees to be the first thing that comes to mind because we get honey from them, right? So honeybees are actually from Europe, and we've really kind of domesticated honeybees because they're social. So they have to be together, and that's why we have this concentration of honey that they produce that humans are then able to harvest. So the really cool thing is, though, that there's actually thousands of different native bees, right? And there's social native bees or wild bees like the bumblebee, and then we have like solitary native bees, which live alone in something kind of like this, like the hotels, the native bee hotels that we made last time. So I wanted to just kind of show some of the different habitats of our native bees. So to start with, we have a really cool old bumblebee nest that we basically made this nest in somebody's garage, and we helped to remove it and allowed the bumblebees to live out their life cycle because bumblebees are social. Okay, so that's
so
kind
they live in a group.
Yeah, they live in a group, in a family, and their nest looks a little different than honeybees. So they make kind of this structure, which we'll get a cool close up here, but you'll be able to see they have all these different cells that they make. And there's some of them that we call honey pots.
Okay, so I was going to say there's honey in some of those. Okay.
So they do the same thing as honeybees. They have to collect food and resources, and some of these are actually enclosed, and they held their babies, their larvae that were developing. And you can kind of see why with the bumblebees, though they're social like honeybees, it's really hard. You can't get honey from them, right? So that's why we don't get honey from other kinds of bees.
So this is actually wax, though.
This is wax.
So they do secrete wax?
They do, yep. Yeah, similar to the honeybees, they secrete and make their own wax in order to create their home. All right. And you can find their colonies, they usually like to nest underground, or sometimes in this case in people's garages or sheds that they haven't gone into for a long time. So bumblebees are super fascinating. They have kind of this annual life cycle where in the fall, the queen bumblebee, so there's just one queen, she will lay new female bumblebees called gines. They're virgins. Those gines will go out on a mating flight. They'll come back to the colony, and actually they'll find a new burrow, and then they'll hibernate for the winter.
Oh, okay.
So it's really great when people leave their leaves and stuff in their landscape, because the bumblebees will nest in that over the winter and stay warm. Okay. Yeah. And then in the following spring, about now, in April, May, those bumblebees, those queens, will reemerge, and then they'll find a burrow and start a new colony. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of the life cycle of the bumblebee, which is just so fascinating because, like I said, they're social. So they've got, a big population within their family.
So, but does the family die out in the winter then?
Yes. Yeah, they usually do. Just the new gines, the new female queens will be the ones that go off, hibernate, and then continue that lineage the following year. Okay. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. So super fun and fascinating little wild bee there, and very important. So actually it's fun because now in the early spring you'll see the queen bumblebees flying around. They're really big, right? So they fly by and you're like, was that like a small bird? It's actually the queen bumblebees, and they're out looking for a new burrow in order to create their colony for the year. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So what else? Yes, so here we have native bees that are more solitary. And basically what that means is, and like I said, there's thousands of species of native bees, which is really exciting. And they just live alone. So we've kind of simulated their natural habitat through these hotels, these native bee hotels, which we call them. And basically our solitary bees, they live in cavities, whether that's in wood or in stems. But actually most native bees live in the ground, in cavities they've made in the ground.
So just in the dirt? Or
yeah,
in
just
the mud?
in the dirt, in bare soil. So
Okay.
it's really great when people can just leave some bare soil
All right.
within their landscapes for these burrowing native bees to make their habitats in.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So honeybees and bumblebees have the black, kind of the black and yellow coloring, at least on most of them. But native bees don't have that, or you don't really notice that, I guess.
Right.
They can be all different colors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so native bees come in all shapes and sizes and colors, which makes them really fun. I actually have some pinned ones that I brought out so we can look at those.
Okay.
And, some are like metallic green and blues.
Okay.
And some are just like black and the size of like a grain of rice. So, which is why it kind of goes hand in hand with like our talk on plants, why different plants and native plants are so important, because different species of native bees feed on different species of plants.
Okay.
Yeah. And some of those flowers that are really tiny, well, those tiny bees are able to feed on them.
All right.
Right. Yeah. So it's a very like intricate, specialized relationship that insects as a whole have with plants in our landscape.
Okay.
Yeah. So, kind of in terms of the habitat of our solitary bees, I have some really cool examples of colonies that we had setting out, or nesting material we had setting out last year. So we can kind of see this is like a cutaway.
Okay.
And you can see how they laid their baby. So that's what they do in these cavities. They lay their egg and then they put pollen with it. So that as that egg develops into a larva, it has food to eat before it crawls its way out of the hole.
How many eggs? I remember from last time that the females are usually towards the back, the males are towards the front.
Yes.
And then just rough guesstimate, how many eggs are usually in something like this?
That is a good question. So it really varies by species.
Okay.
And that's why it's really important when people like make these kind of nests that you at least want to have like 6 inches in depth, because that way they can lay more of their eggs. And also have, like you said, females and males, because if the cavity is too short, they're only going to lay one gender. And then obviously you don't have that much diversity emerging.
Right.
So really important to have, like, if we're going to simulate their natural nesting material, we want to hit those right dimensions. So yeah, so these are kind of a fun little experiment that we've been doing with these hotels, so we can see how they're laying their eggs and then what they're stuffing the nest with, because it's different materials for every species. So some native bees will stuff leaves, some will stuff like flower petals, and in this case it looks like more of like just like woody plant material. And we've also seen where there's native and solitary wasp species, so they'll also use these. And you can tell because they use different materials too, like mud and grasses, but the differentiation is like our wasps are carnivores, so instead of putting pollen with their egg, they'll put like a tree cricket. So when that egg hatches, that's the food that it eats, right? That's what it's been evolved to eat. So that's how we are able to usually tell the wasp cavities. And the cool thing about solitary bees and wasps is because they don't have a huge colony with honey and lots of brood to protect, they won't sting. Right? So this kind of stuff is really safe to have, as long as you're not like putting your hand in front or trying to catch the bee or the wasp. they'll leave you alone.
Okay.
And they won't come out and sting you and be maybe more aggressive like the solitary or like the social bees are, like honeybees and bumblebees.
They're protecting, yeah.
They're very protective, right? Because they have such a concentration of those resources. And in the wild, there's a lot of natural predators like bears and raccoons that will try to get into the honey, right? Kind of that classic image of the bear with honey.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah.
So most of this looks pretty new. How do you maintain this bee habitat?
Right, yeah. So when we create habitat for native bees, we want to make sure, like you said, we maintain it and we keep it clean. Because if you put nesting material in and keep it for 2 or 3 years, there'll be other insects and parasites that'll start to inhabit the cavities.
Okay.
So at the end of the year in the fall, you'll notice that most of the holes will be capped, like this one, where this resin bee capped their cavity with some mud. And so we noticed that at the end of the year, and that's fine. We'll leave it out throughout the winter, but then very early spring, usually like March, what we recommend is, so this is a block from last year. So we like to take out the old blocks from the previous year that have been capped.
Okay, so just anything like this too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All in the stems,
okay.
all of it. Yeah, here, I'll even demonstrate with some stems. So if they're capped, we take them out. And then what we do with them, because these bees are still in there because they haven't chewed it out, right? The cap is still intact.
Okay.
So what we want to do, because we want to get new nesting material in these habitats so that emerging bees then have new habitat for the spring.
Okay.
Because they will be nesting year round.
Okay, that's one of my questions was what's the length of life cycle?
Right. So it's a year.
Okay.
In your species, with each species, it varies. So the early emerging ones will want to then nest early.
Okay.
So we want to get the new nesting material in early spring, which means we have to take out this old capped nesting material. And the best thing to do with this, so you give these bees a chance to emerge still, is very simple, we just have an empty cardboard box.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
And we've just cut a hole in the corner of it. And we just will take this nesting material, thank you, and we'll put it inside the box. Yep, we just set it inside.
Just set it in there.
Yep,
okay.
Nothing fancy. And then we close it up. And what we'll do then is we'll take this box and we'll put it somewhere outside that's dry.
Okay.
Okay. So we want it to be outside because what will happen is those bees will emerge as adults and then they can fly out. So we want it to be outside. We don't want to put it like in our garage.
Okay. All right.
But we do want it to be dry. So anywhere with like an overhang is definitely ideal. That's outside, maybe on a front deck. And then these bees can emerge because then they'll be adults and then they'll start foraging on the flowers in the spring and the summer.
Okay.
Yep. So that's really the best way to replace nesting materials within our native bee hotels, while also giving those bees from the previous year a chance to basically chew their way out of the cavity and live.
So, but there's going to be different species, so they'll come out at different times.
Right.
So you don't want to get rid of the box too quick, or you can check and see who's come out. And
that's right. Yep. You can just check those capped cavities and see who's chewed their way out, because you'll be able to still see like the capped material on the outside of the circle, but there will be a hole right through the middle of the babies that have chewed their way out.
Okay. Cool.
So, yep. And you can just leave that box. Yeah, I would recommend just throughout that year just to give them a chance, because like you said, different species emerge at different times. So you want to give them all kind of a chance to emerge, while also providing new clean nesting material for the year. Yep. And then like if you want to still use like the wood blocks or stems, you can always just clean them in like a dilution of bleach water after all the bees have emerged. And then use that nesting material for like the following year. But definitely cleaning it is important, because other insects and even like there'll be like different fungus that will eventually kind of take over the nesting material because it's exposed. So yeah.
So if you don't have one of these, but you want to help wild bees in your yard, what else can you do?
Right. That's a great question, because you don't have to have this whole setup. It's fun. This is more for us. We do this with the Bee Lab just, you know, for research, but also for extension and being able to show people the different kinds of bees that nest in these cavities. And really, how exciting is that, right? To be able to see bees up close and also showing like they're not bad. They're not scary, you know? So this is really more for us. But bees naturally, they will live in, you know, expired plant stems.
Okay.
So really it comes back to just providing the plants, especially native plants for bees to eat, but also then they live in that.
Okay.
So we can look at what that looks like in the landscape, because if people just have plants, then the bees they'll find a way and live in those as well.
Cool.
And also the exposed soil. So I think we'll be able to find some cavities here where there's bees nesting in the soil. So that's important too, just leaving some exposed soil. And that's the best way you can help out the native bees in your own backyard.
Cool. Okay.
Let's go check it out.
All right, so these look like some bare stems.
Yes, great find. So this here is aster. And what you've just found is the old stems from last year's plants, right? So what we have is, you can even see inside of the stems, they're hollow in the middle.
Okay.
So this is what the native or wild bees will come and naturally nest in and lay their egg and stuff it with pollen.
Okay, and then you said like there's a pith in between there?
Right, yeah. So some of these you can even see the pith in the middle, which is just kind of this fibrous substance within the center of the stem. And the native bees, what they'll do is they'll come and just chew that out. And in fact, they actually kind of prefer the ones with pith because it's been unoccupied. So it's like a brand new home for them. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so you can actually see that it's actually a cavity.
Right. Yep. So that's the inside. If you did kind of a cutaway, that's a great find. You can see how it is that cavity. And what's neat is that those native bees, they come in different sizes. So they'll find a cavity that's the size that they want, you know, kind of fitting their body. Okay. And that's what they'll choose to lay their eggs in.
So it's good to have a variety of plants then, so you can have a variety of pollinators.
Yeah. And sometimes if you even stop and look in some of these holes, you'll see like a bee butt, because what the adults are doing is they're going and they're, you know, either chewing out that pith, or they're starting to pack in pollen that they're collecting for their eggs to be laid on. So sometimes you'll even see the bees coming in and out of these stems, just like you would the native bee hotel. Okay.
Very cool.
Yeah. So in the garden here, here's an example of a soil cavity dwelling wild bee habitat.
Okay. Oh, okay. Because you can see the residue or what it dug up on the outside there.
Yes, absolutely.
So do they stuff those as well then, right?
They do.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and it's super interesting because like I said, over 50% of native bees are actually ground dwelling, and which is very exciting, but also it makes it very hard to study them, right? Because we can't pull out their nesting material because it's in the ground. So they're just super fascinating, mysterious, you know, insects. And like I said, so easy to provide habitat for them, right? Just bare soil.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Courtney. This has been really interesting learning about native bees, and now I'm excited to go home and see what actually lives in my hotel and plant some stuff just so that I can have more native bees and more native pollinators around. If I want more information, what do I need to do?
Yeah, so we have more resources online at the UNL Bee Lab website, but also there's so many other resources out there. One of my favorites is Xerces Society.
Okay.
You can learn more about, you know, what to plant, but also they have really great resources for bumblebees, right? They have programs, citizen science programs like Bumblebee Watch.
Okay.
And they can also help you identify like different kinds of bumblebees based on the coloration of their stripes. So lots of great resources out there for people, for native bees, and also, what to plant to feed them. So,
well, I came up with a book list too from the library. So I know we have some books by the Xerces Society. Perfect. So yeah, the library might be a good place to start too.
Yes, that's definitely where I would want to send people as well. So great. Thanks so much, Pam.
Thank you.
This is fun.
Thanks for joining us for Storytime in the Pollinator Garden.